Hello, folks. We are back to the NorthForm podcast. Welcome. We are covering Energies of People, the Gospel of Relaxation on Vital Reserves is the title by William James. Bottled lightning, in truth, is one of our American ideals, even if a young girl's character. Now, it's most ungracious, and it may seem to some person unpatriotic to criticize in public the physical peculiarities of one's people, of one's own family, so to speak. Besides, it may be said, and said with justice, that there are plenty of bottled lightning temperaments in other countries, and plenty of phlegmatic temperaments here, and that, when all is said and done, the more or less of tension about which I am making such a fuss is a very small item in the sum total of a nation's life, and not worth solemn treatment at a time when agreeable rather than disagreeable things should be talked about. Well, in one sense, the more or less of tension in our faces and in our unused muscles is a small thing. Not much mechanical work is done by these contractions, but it is not always the material size of the thing that measures its importance. Often it is its place and function. One of the most philosophical remarks I've ever heard made was by an unlettered workman who was doing some repairs in my house many years ago. Quote, "There's a very little difference between one man and another," he said, "when you go to the bottom of it. But what little there is difference is very important." And the remark certainly applies to this case. The general overcontraction may be small when estimated in foot-pounds, but its importance is immense on account of its effect on the over-contracted person's spiritual life. This follows consequence from the theory of our emotions to which I made reference at the beginning of the article. For by the sensations that so incessantly pour in from the overtense, excited body, the overtense and excited habit of mind is kept up, and the sultry, threatening, exhausting, thunderous inner atmosphere never quite clears away. If you never wholly give yourself up to the chair you sit in, but always keep your leg and body muscles half contracted for a rise, if you breathe 18 or 19 instead of 16 times a minute, and never quite breathe out at that, what mental mood can you be in but one of inner panting and expectancy? And how can the future and its worries possibly forsake your mind? On the other hand, how can they gain admission to your mind if your brow be unruffled, your respiration calm and complete, and your muscles all relaxed? Now, what is the cause of this absence of repose, this bottled lightning quality in us Americans? The explanation of it is that it comes from the extreme dryness of our climate and the acrobatic performances of our thermometer, coupled with the extraordinary progressiveness of our life, the hard work, the railroad speed, the rapid success, and all the other things we know so well by heart. Well, our climate is certainly exciting, but hardly more so than that of many parts of Europe, where, nevertheless, no bottled lightning girls are found, and the work done and the pace of life are as extreme in every great capital of Europe as they are here. To me, both of these pretended causes are utterly insufficient to explain the facts. To explain them, we must go not to physical geography, but to psychology and sociology. What's that weird effect that's showing up? Don't know what that is. The latest chapter, both in sociology and psychology, to be developed in a manner that approaches adequacy, is the chapter on the imitative impulse. First, Bagehot, then Tarde, then Royce, and Baldwin here have shown that invention and imitation, taken together, form, one may say, the entire warp and woof of human life. That is, imitation and innovation. So, insofar as it is social, the American overtension and jerkiness and breathlessness and intensity and agony of expression are primarily social and only secondarily physiological phenomenon. They're bad habits, nothing more or less, bred of custom and example, born of the imitation of bad models and the cultivation of false personal ideals. How are idioms acquired? How do local peculiarities of phrase and accent come about? Through an accidental example set by someone which struck the ears of others, and was quoted and copied, till at last everyone in the locality chimed in. Just so it is with national tricks of vocalization or intonation, with national manners, fashions of movements and gestures, and habitual expressions of face. We here in America, through following a succession of pattern setters whom it is now impossible to trace, and through influencing each other in a bad direction, have at last settled down collectively into what, for better or worse, is our own characteristic national type. A type with the production of which, so far as these habits go, the climate and condition have been practically nothing at all to do with. This type, which we have thus reached by our imitativeness, we now have fixed upon us, for better or worse. Now, no type can be wholly disadvantageous, but so burr as our type follows the bottled lightning fashion, it can be wholly good. Dr. Clouston was certainly right in thinking that eagerness, breathlessness, and anxiety are not signs of strength, they're signs of weakness and of bad coordination. The even forehead, the slap-like cheek, the codfish eye may be less interesting for the moment, but they are more promising signs than intense expression is of what we may expect of the possessor in the long run. Your dull and hurried work gets over a great deal of ground because he never goes backward or breaks down. Your intense, convulsive worker breaks down and has bad mood so often that you never know where he may be when you most need his help. He may be having one of his quote-unquote bad days. We say that so many of our fellow countrymen collapse and have to be sent abroad to rest their nerves because they work so hard. I suspect that this is an immense mistake. I suspect that neither the nature nor the amount of our work is accountable for the frequency and severity of our breakdowns, but that their cause lies rather in those absurd feelings of hurry and of having no time, and in the breathlessness and tension, and that anxiety of feature and the solicitude for results, that lack of inner harmony and ease, in short, by which, with us, the work is so apt to be accompanied, and from which a European who should do the same work would 9 times out of 10 be free. These perfectly wanton and unnecessary tricks of inner attitude and outer manner in us, caught from the social atmosphere, keep up by tradition and idealized by many as the admirable way of life, are the last straws that break the American camel's back, the final overflowers of our measure of wear and tear and fatigue. The voice, for example, in a surprisingly large number of us, has a tired and plaintive sound. Some of us are really tired, for I do not mean absolutely deny that our climate has a tiring quality, but far more of us are not tired at all, or would not be tired at all unless we had got into a wretched trick of feeling tired by following the prevalent habits of vocalization and expression. And if talking high and tired and living excitedly and hurriedly would only enable us to do more by the way, even while breaking us down in the end, it would be different. There would be sane compensation, some excuse for going on. But the exact reverse is the cause. It is your relaxed and easy worker who is in no hurry and quite thoughtless most of the while of consequences, who is your efficient worker, and tension and anxiety and present and future all mixed up together in our mind at once are the surest drags upon steady progress and hindrances to our success. My colleague, Professor Munsterberg, an excellent observer, who came here recently, has written some notes on America to German papers. He says in substance that the appearance of unusual energy in America is superficial and illusory. Bang really do nothing but the habits of jerkiness and bad coordination for which we have to thank the defective training of our people. I think myself that it is a high time for old legends and traditional opinions to be changed, and that if anyone should begin to write about Yankee efficiency and feebleness and inability to do anything with time except waste it, he would have a very pretty paradoxical little thesis to sustain, with a great many facts to quote and a great deal of experience to appeal to in its proof. Well, my friends, if our dear American character is weakened by all this overtension, and I think whatever reserves you may make, that you will agree to the main facts, where does the remedy lie? Of course, where lay the origins of the disease? If a vicious fashion and taste are to blame for this thing, the fashion and taste must be changed. And though it is no small thing to inoculate 70 million of people with new standards, yet if there is to be any relief, that will have to be done. We must change ourselves from a race that admires jerk and snap for their own sakes, and looks down upon low voices and quiet ways as dull, to one that, on the contrary, has calm for its ideal, and for their own sakes loves harmony, dignity, and ease. So we go back to the psychology of imitation again. There's only one way to improve ourselves, and this is by some of us setting an example, which the others may pick up and imitate, till the new fashion spreads from east to west. Some of us are in more favorable positions than others to set new fashions. Some are much more striking personally and imitably, so to speak, but no living person is sunk so low as to not be imitated by somebody. Thackeray sometimes says of the Irish nation that there never was an Irishman so poor that he didn't have a still poorer Irishman living at his expense, and surely there is no human being whose example does not work contagiously in some particularly. The very idiots at our public institutions imitate each other's peculiarities, and if you should individually achieve calmness and harmony in your own person, you may depend upon it, that a wave of imitation will spread from you, as surely as a circle spread outward from a stone is dropped into a lake. Fortunately, we shall not have to be absolute pioneers. Even now in New York, they have formed a society for the improvement of our national vocalization, and one perceives its machinations as already in the shape of various newspaper paragraphs intended to stir up dissatisfaction with the awful thing that it is, and better still than that, because more radical in general is the gospel of relaxation, as one may call it, preached by Miss Annie Payson Call of Boston, and her admirable little volume called, quote, Power Through Repose, a book that ought to be in the hands of every teacher and student in America of either sex. You need only be followers, then, on a path already opened up by others. But of one thing, be confident. Others still will follow you. And this brings me to one more application of psychology to practical life, to which I will call attention briefly and then close. If one's example of easy and calm ways to be effectively contagious, one feels by instinct that the less voluntary one aims at getting imitated, the more unconscious one beeps in the matter, the more likely one is to succeed. Become the imitable thing, and you may then discharge your minds of all responsibility for the imitation. The laws of social nature will take care of that result. Now, the psychological principle on which this precept repose is a law of very deep and widespread importance, is the conduct of our lives, and at the same time a law which we Americans most grievously neglect. Stated technically, the law is that strong fading about one's self tends to arrest the free associations of one objective ideas and motor processes. We get the extreme example of this in the mental disease called melancholia, nowadays called depression. Let me say that last sentence again. Technically stated, the law is this: strong fading of one's self tends to arrest the free association of one's objective ideas and motor processes. A depressed, melancholic patient is filled and through with intensely painful emotion about himself. He is threatened, he is guilty, he is doomed, he is annihilated, he is lost. His mind is fixed as if in a cramp on these feelings of his own situation, and in all the books on insanity you may read that the usual varied flow of his thoughts has ceased. His associative processes, to use the technical phrase, is inhibited, and his ideas stand stock still, shut up to their one monotonous function of reiterating inwardly the fact of the man's desperate estate. And the inhibitive influence is not due to the mere fact that his emotion is painful. Joyous emotions about the self also stop the association of our ideas. A saint in ecstasy is as motionless and irresponsive and one-idea'd as a melancholic. And without going as far as ecstatic saints, we know how in everyone a great or sudden pleasure may paralyze the flow of thought. Ask young people returning from a party or a spectacle, and all excited about it, what it was. Oh, it was find it, was find it, was find. Is all the information you are likely to receive until the excitement has calmed down. Probably every one of my hearers has been made temporarily half idiotic by some great success or piece of good fortune. Good, 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 is all we can say at such times to ourselves until we smile at our own very foolishness. Now, from all this we can draw an extremely practical conclusion. If, namely, we wish our trains of ideation and volition to be copious and varied and effective, we must form the habit of freeing them from the inhibitive influence of reflection upon them, of egoistic preoccupation about their result. Such a habit, like other habits, can be formed. Prudence and duty and self-regard and emotions of Ambition and emotions of anxiety have, of course, a needful part to play in our lives, but confine then, as far as possible, to the occasions where you are making your general resolutions and deciding on your plans of campaign, and keep them out of the details. When once a decision is reached and execution is the order of the day, dismiss absolutely all responsibility and care about the outcome. Unclamp, in a word, your intellectual and practical machinery and let it run free. The service it will do you will be twice as good. Who are the scholars who get, quote, rattled, unquote, in the recitation room? Those who think of the possibilities of failure and feel the great importance of the act. Who are those who do recite well? Often those who are most indifferent. Their ideas reel themselves out of their memory of their own accord. Why do we hear the complaint so often that social life in New England is either less rich and expressive or more fatiguing than it is in some other parts of the world? To what is the fact be to do, unless to the overactive conscience of the people, afraid of either saying something too trivial and too obvious, or something insincere, or something unworthy of one's interlocutor, or something in some way or other not adequate to the occasion? How can conversation possibly steer itself through such a sea of responsibilities and inhibitions as this? On the other hand, conversation does flourish, and society is refreshing, and neither dull on the one hand nor exhausting from its effort on the other. Wherever people forget their scruples and take the brakes off their hearts and let their tongues wag as automatically and irresponsibly as they will. They talk much in pedagogic circles today about the duty of the teacher to prepare for every lesson in advance. To some extent, this is useful, but we Yankees are assuredly not those to whom such a general doctrine should be preached. We are only too careful, as it is. The advice I should give to most teachers would be in the words of one who is herself an admirable teacher. Prepare yourself in the subject so well that it shall be always on tap. Then in the classroom, trust your spontaneity and fling away all further care. My advice to students, especially to girl students, would be somewhat similar. Just as a bicycle chain may be too tight, so may one's carefulness and conscientiousness be so tense as to hinder the running of one's mind. Take, for example, periods when there are many successive days of examination impending. 1 ounce of good nervous tone in an examination is worth many pounds of anxious study for its advance. If you want really to do your best in an examination, fling away the book the day before. Say to yourself, I won't waste another minute on this miserable thing, and I don't care an iota whether I succeed or not. Say this sincerely and feel it. And go out and play, or go to bed and sleep, and I am sure the result next day will encourage you to use the method permanently. I have heard this advice given to a student by Miss Call, whose book on muscular relaxation I quoted a moment ago, in her later book entitled, quote, As a Matter of Course, unquote, The Gospel of Moral Relaxation, of dropping things from the mind and not, quote, caring, is preached with equal success. Not only our preachers, but our friends the theosophists and the mind curers of various religious sects are also harping on this string. And with the doctors, the Delsartians, the various mind-curing sects, and such writers as Mr. Dresser, Prentice Mulford, Mr. Horace Fletcher, and Mr. Trine to help, and the whole band of school teachers and magazine readers chiming in, it really looks as if a good start might be made in the direction of changing our American mental habit into something more indifferent and strong. Worry means always and invariably inhibition of associations and loss of effective power. Of course, the sovereign cure for worry is religious faith, and this, of course, you also know. The turbulent billows of the fretful surface leave the deep parts of the ocean undisturbed. And to him, who has a hold on vaster and more permanent realities, the hourly vicissitudes of his personal destiny seem relatively insignificant things. The really religious person is accordingly unshakable and full of equanimity, and calmly ready for any duty that the day may bring forth. This is charmingly illustrated by a little work with which I recently became acquainted, called The Practice of the Presence of God, the Best Ruler of a Holy Life, by Brother Lawrence. Bong Conversations and Letters of Nicholas Herman of Lorraine, translated from the French. Sounds good. I extracted a few passages, the conversation being given in indirect discourse. Brother Lawrence was a Carmelite friar, converted at Paris in 1666. He said that he had been footman to Mr. Fjorbert, the treasurer, and that he was a great awkward fellow who broke everything, that he had desired to be received into a monastery, thinking that he would there be made to smart for his awkwardness and the faults he could commit, and so he should sacrifice to God his life with its pleasure, but that God had disappointed him, he having met with nothing but satisfaction in that state. Quote, that he had long been troubled in mind from a certain belief that he should be damned, that all the men in the world could not have persuaded him to the contrary, but that he had thus reasoned with himself about it. I engaged in religious life only for the hoe of God, and had endeavored to add only for him. Whatsoever becomes of me, whether I be lost or saved, I will always continue to add purely for the load of God. I shall have this good at last, that till death I shall have done all that in me is to hoe him. That since then he had passed in his life in perfect liberty and continual joy. That when an occasion of practicing some virtue offered, he addressed himself to God, saying, Lord, I cannot do this, unless thou enablest me, and that then he received strength more than sufficient. That when he had failed in his duty, he only confessed his fault, saying to God, I shall never do otherwise, if you leave me to myself. It is you who must hinder my failing, and made what is amiss. That after this he gave himself no further uneasiness about it. That he had been lately sent into Burgundy to buy the provisions of wine for the society, which was a very unwelcome task for him, because he had no turn for business, and because he was lame and could not go about the boat, but by rolling himself over the casks. That, however, he gave himself no uneasiness about it, nor about the purchase of the wine, that he said to God, it was his business he was about, and that he afterward found it well performed, that he had been sent into Auvergne the year before, upon the same account, that he could not tell how the matter passed, but that it proved very well. So likewise in his business in the kitchen, to which he had naturally a great aversion, having accustomed himself to do everything there for the love of God, and with prayer upon all occasions for his grace to do his work well, and he had round everything easy during 15 years that he had been employed there. That he was very well pleased with the post he was now in, but that he was as ready to quit that as the former, since he was always pleasing himself in every condition, by doing little things for the love of God. That the goodness of God assured him he would not forsake him utterly, and that he would give him strength to bear whatever evil he permitted to happen to him, and therefore that he feared nothing, and had no occasion to consult with anybody about his state, that when he had attempted to do it, he had always come away more perplexed. The simple-heartedness of good brother Lawrence, and the relaxation of all unnecessary solicitudes and anxieties in him, is a refreshing spectacle. The need for feeling responsible all the livelong day has been preached long enough in our New England, long enough exclusively at any rate, and long enough to the female sex. What our girl students and woman teachers most need nowadays is not the exacerbation, but rather the toning down of their moral tensions. Even now I fear that some of my fair hearers may be making an undying resolve to become strenuously relaxed, cost what it will, for the remainder of her life. It is needless to say that this is not the way to do it. The way to do it, paradoxically as it may seem, is genuinely not to care whether you're doing it or not. Then possibly, by the grace of God, you may all at once find that you are doing it, and having learned what the trick feels like, you may, again by the grace of God, be enabled to go on and do so. And that sometimes, like this, may be the happy experience of all my hearers is, in closing, my most earnest wish. And that is the end of the short essay read for you from the Kindle app by William James on Vital Reserves, subtitled The Energies of Men, the Gospel of Relaxation. And now, continuing with the katana mindset, we were on Chapter 5, Surrendering to Growth, a moment of personal failure that led to unexpected clarity. It was a cold winter evening, and I had wrapped up a meeting with a client that had gone horribly wrong. I remember walking out of the building, my mind racing with a mix of frustration and disbelief. My heart was pounding, not just from the stress of the meeting, but from the realization that I had failed. not just in a small way, but in a way that felt monumental at the time. I'd been working for weeks on this project, putting in long hours, crafting every detail with the precision of someone who thought they knew they had everything under control. But as the client laid out their feedback, it was clear that I had missed the mark. What I thought would be an elegant solution turned out to be a mismatch to their needs. I'd built something that, in my eyes, was perfect, but it wasn't what they needed. That stark contrast between what I envisioned and what was actually wanted was a painful reminder of how far I had fallen from the mark. At the moment, I wanted to turn around and quit, leave the meeting, walk away from the project entirely, or hide under the covers and pretend it never happened. I had never liked failure. I prided myself on being a perfectionist, and my entire identity was built around the idea that if I worked hard enough, I could control the outcome. I could avoid mistakes. But now, standing in the parking lot, I realized that in trying so hard to control everything, I had lost sight of what truly mattered, the ability to adapt, to learn, to grow. That failure, the sting of missing the mark so completely, set in motion something I hadn't expected, a moment of clarity. It wasn't an instant shift or a dramatic epiphany, but in the days that followed, I began to see the value of the experience. I found myself reflecting on what went wrong, not just in the project, but in my approach. I had been too focused on the external validation, on what others thought was right, rather than on the understanding the deeper needs behind the task at hand. In trying to, quote, perfect everything, I had overlooked the core problem I was supposed to be solving. I also began to recognize how deeply tied my identity was to my success. If the project failed, it felt like I had failed, but that couldn't be further from the truth. I was learning, I was growing. That was the point. And it was in the humility of that realization that I began to accept failure, not as a sign of defeat, but as a necessary part of my journey. Failure. The real clarity came when I stopped looking at failure as something that needed to be avoided at all costs, and instead I started to see it as a tool. Failure as a tool. I realized that my resistance to failure had been holding me back, actually. I'd been so afraid of not getting things perfect that I'd missed the opportunities for growth in the messy, imperfect process of learning. What I thought was a personal failure was actually a pivotal moment in my transformation. Looking back now, I can see how this experience fits into a broader pattern in my life. So often, we cling to stability and control, thinking that success is the key to happiness and fulfillment. But when we are too attached to success, we limit ourselves from learning the deeper lessons that come through trial, error, and ultimately through failure. When we let go of that attachment to perfection, we open ourselves to greater growth. In a way, this failure was the gift that kept giving. It's funny how failure, something we often view as the opposite of success, can be one of the most powerful teachers in our lives. Through this experience, I learned that failure isn't the end of the road, it's the beginning of a new chapter. It teaches us to adapt, to question our assumptions, and to refine our approach. It's a teacher that forces us to dig deeper and find solutions that we would have never considered if everything had gone smoothly. Speaking of perfection, And so this moment of failure became a defining moment in my life, not because it was easy or a pleasant experience, but because it was the turning point where I began to truly understand what transformation meant. It wasn't about avoiding mistakes or seeking external validation. It was about embracing the messy, imperfect process of growth. It was about learning to face challenges head-on without letting the fear of failure dictate my path. In the days after the meeting, I started to reframe how I viewed my work, my success, and my failures. I began to understand that failure wasn't a reflection of my worth, but an integral part of my evolution. It became clear to me that personal growth doesn't happen in the absence of challenges or setbacks. It happens because of those challenges and setbacks. That realization was the key to unlocking a new approach to life and work, one that embraced change, allowing for imperfection, and welcomed the lessons that came with every failure. Now, when I encounter setbacks, whether in my career or personal life, I try to remember that these moments aren't the end of the story. They're the beginning of a new chapter, one that offers the chance to grow, learn, and become a better version of yourself. Instead of fearing failure, we look for the lessons held in the failure. In fact, I've come to believe that failure is often the most direct path to clarity and transformation. This story isn't just one example, but it encapsulates the essence of the process we all go through when we confront failure. It's not easy, it's not comfortable, but it's through these moments of personal failure that we often gain the most clarity and insight. And the clarity that comes from failure, especially when we embrace it with openness and humility, can lead us to a new level of resilience and growth that we would have not thought possible. This realization resonates with the Japanese concept of shikata ganai, accepting what cannot be changed, which I had observed during my time in Japan. In Japan, the concept of acceptance isn't merely a passive resignation, it's a proactive stance towards life's inevitable challenges. Acceptance. Remember last time we talked about radical acceptance therapy? Maybe not last time, it was acceptance and commitment therapy. A perfect example of this can be seen in Japan's approach to natural disasters, especially earthquakes. Japan sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, one of the most active seismic regions in the world. Earthquakes are a frequent and sometimes devastating occurrence. Yet, rather than living in fear or denial, the Japanese culture has developed a unique form of resilience and adaptability in response. This adaptability is deeply rooted in the Japanese approach to acceptance, which allows individuals and communities to face inevitable challenges with a mindset focused on preparation and constructive responses, rather than resistance or panic. One of the most notable ways Japanese society embraces the inevitability of earthquakes is through its culture of preparedness. Unlike many other parts of the world where natural disasters are often met with a sense of disbelief or an attempt to avoid thinking about them, Japan has ingrained disaster readiness into the very fabric of everyday life. Earthquakes are accepted as a fundamental part of life in Japan, and the response is not one of resistance but of readiness and resilience. From a young age, children in Japan are taught how to respond to an earthquake. Schools conduct regular drills, ensuring the students know exactly what to do the moment the ground shakes. These drills aren't mere simulations, they're deeply embedded into the education system, often practiced multiple times a year. Students, teachers, and staff alike all move through the drills with a sense of calm efficiency, reflecting the belief that preparedness is the best way to respond to the unpredictable. Rather than creating anxiety, these drills are a demonstration of how preparedness can bring peace of mind and reduce fear when the real event happens. I'm reminded of the quote, "Chance favors the prepared." In addition to these school drills, Japan's government has implemented extensive infrastructure projects designed to withstand earthquakes. Buildings are constructed with the latest seismic technology, including shock absorbers and flexible frames that allow structures to sway rather than crumple during an earthquake. The mindset is that while earthquakes cannot be avoided, the damage they cause can be minimized through thoughtful design and strategic planning. This proactive acceptance that earthquakes are a natural and recurring part of life has led to one of the safest and most resilient urban environments in the world. The role of shikata gainai in earthquake preparedness. The Japanese phrase shikata gainai, which loosely translates to "it cannot be helped," is a cornerstone of the culture of acceptance. This doesn't mean that the challenges are shrugged off with indifference. Rather, it reflects the idea that some things are beyond one's control and must be dealt with pragmatically. In the case of earthquakes, shikata gainai embodies the understanding that earthquakes are inevitable and must be faced head on, not avoided or feared. This cultural mindset fosters an approach rather than expending energy on resistance or denial, we focus on what can be done in the face of that inevitable thing. In Japan, once an earthquake occurs, it's not uncommon for individuals and entire communities to calmly assess the damage and immediately begin the process of recovery. The psychological and emotional response is one of acceptance, recognizing that disaster has struck and that it's possible to rebuild, regroup, and recover. This doesn't mean the shock or the pain of loss isn't felt. Rather, it indicates a deep cultural commitment to moving forward constructively. Number 3, adaptability in response to crisis. Acceptance in Japan doesn't just mean passivity, instead it fuels adaptability. One of the most compelling examples of how acceptance fosters adaptability is the quick and efficient response to natural disasters, particularly after the Great East Japan earthquake in 2011. The aftermath of the disaster demonstrated the remarkable resilience and adaptability of the Japanese people. Within hours of the earthquake, emergency response teams were mobilized, shelters were set up, roads were cleared, and power was restored in record time. The Japanese people didn't succumb to the shock of the disaster. They adapted swiftly, implementing contingency plans that had been developed long before the earthquake struck. These efforts were not accidental, they were the result of a culture deeply ingrained with the belief that in life's most challenging moments, the ability to adapt and respond effectively is paramount. This adaptability is also evident in Japan's disaster recovery efforts. After an earthquake, it is common to see entire neighborhoods rebuild within a few years, with a renewed sense of solidarity. This adaptability, fueled by a culture of acceptance, is not limited to physical reconstruction. It extends to the emotional and psychological resilience of the community. Recovery efforts are not rushed, but are based on long-term vision, ensuring that each step of the rebuilding process is handled thoughtfully and effectively. In this way, Japan's culture of acceptance allows for a more sustainable form of recovery that recognizes the need for both immediate response and long-term planning. Acceptance as collective strength. In Japanese culture, acceptance is not just an individual trait, it's a collective strength. The idea of group resilience is crucial in understanding how Japanese society deals with crises. All right, I'm going to end there for now and just give you a short diatribe of summation of this. So acceptance, preparedness, what I call being ready to be ready, preparing yourself mentally, shikata gainai, accepting what cannot be changed, implementing strategies to try and reduce the amount of pain caused by a national disaster. And of course, I think the key here is the deep rooting in acceptance. Actually, for now, I'm a bit tired. My voice is a little tired. I've been singing and doing other things lately. Hope you enjoyed. Hopefully you got something out of that. If you made it to the end, congratulations. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.